Hey everyone, this is Brian from the Tennis IQ podcast. Josh and I hope that you are enjoying the content and discussions that we put out week after week. If you'd like to support the podcast and help us to continue to produce quality episodes, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Currently, we have 3 tiers of support: the fan level at $3 per month, the supporter level at $7 per month, and the champion level at $20 per month. Benefits of joining the Tennis IQ podcast community include episode transcripts, participation in book club discussions, and access to monthly masterclasses with me and Josh. For more on these benefits of support, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Thank you so much. And now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing the 2023 Wimbledon Championships. On the men's side, Carlos Alcaraz beat Novak Djokovic in a classic, in a 5-setter. And we will definitely be talking about that. And on the women's side, Marketa Vondrousova beat Ons Jabeur to win her first major championship. So I think there's a lot of different themes that we want to touch on today, both about the champions on each side, men's and women's side, but also some other themes that we noticed throughout. I know there are definitely some storylines that we wanted to touch on as well. Chris Eubanks and the run of Chris Eubanks being one of them, and sort of his journey leading him to this point. But yeah, I think there's a number of different directions that we can go in. Should we start with maybe the Alcaraz-Djokovic final and maybe talk about some of the themes from the men's side first, and then we can talk about the women's final? How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good, Josh. And as you said, it was a classic. I think in terms of the drama of the match, I don't know that the whole thing was like top level tennis the entire time. I think there were times where both guys were struggling to find their games a little bit. Certainly Alcaraz at the beginning. I felt like Alcaraz's best tennis actually came out in the 5th set. I think he really found his drop shot game much more so in the 5th than he had in previous sets, and really finding good moments to use it where Djokovic didn't even try. Showing that was absolutely the right play in that moment. And so, I thought it was a very interesting match in terms of if we look at, say, the mental strength of an Alcaraz and handling a first set 6-1. He had break points in the first game against Djokovic's serve, didn't win them, had a shaky service game. And then his game seemed to struggle the rest of the set. And so it was going to be interesting to see how he would turn that around. Like, it was similar to Paris in that regard. And in Paris at Roland Garros, he had to, he suffered seemingly cramps that got in the way of his ability to compete the last couple of sets. And so I think everybody was looking out for in this match, how will he handle the tension and pressure of playing a final, his first Wimbledon final. And obviously it looks like he handled that. He passed that test. And personally, Josh, my thought was that he was going to pass that test. I think he was going to learn a lot from the experience in Paris and be completely ready for however he was going to feel in meeting Djokovic again. And so, although at first it didn't necessarily look that way in that first set. But I think the nice thing about Alcaraz is that he appears to be always very optimistic in his approach that he can play better, and very positive in his approach. And I think he has the self-belief to beat top guys. He's certainly beaten Djokovic before, never in a this magnitude, but I think he believes that he can, and that he always believes he can play better. And that's a real strength of his, that I don't know that everybody else on the tour necessarily has that, especially when facing someone like Djokovic. And he was able to do it. And so it was very interesting, sort of back and forth. It almost looked like it was on track to be a 4-set win. And then, Djokovic, here he comes. And the guy's really tough. He's just tough to beat. And that's why I think you have to give Alcaraz a lot of credit. And Djokovic gave him a lot of credit, both in, post-match speech as well as in his press conference. Even saying that Alcaraz has elements of the big three, elements of Novak, elements of Roger, elements of Rafa, and might be more complete than all three of them. And that's very nice to say. And I think a lot of us, when we watch Alcaraz play, can see that for sure. So I think great final. The drama was there. There are a lot of good mental themes going on there. Really, probably the two best players we have in the world right now, especially in 5-set matches. They're both very, very tough to beat. And hopefully we can get some more matches between these two in the coming months and years. I think Djokovic, he appears to be in the physical shape that he's not faltering at all. And so I hope he'll be around for a while.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think as tennis fans, I think we can all root for having more of these matches between the two of them, because I think in certain ways they are able to bring out their best. And as you said, that doesn't mean that they're at their best the entire time. But I think there's something that they're able to bring out of each other. It's that fight, that battle. And yeah, the match was quite intense. I mean, I think that first set where Djokovic won at 6-1, Djokovic was at his best and Alcaraz was not. Alcaraz was tight, looked nervous, looked a little edgy. And yeah, I don't think too many people would have expected that it would have been 3 sets like that. But, I think it was definitely not the start that Alcaraz would have wanted, especially after Paris, where in that, in Paris where they split the first 2 sets, was 1 set all, and then Alcaraz had these, pretty horrible cramps in the 3rd and 4th sets and lost those sets 6-1, 6-1, and really, physically just couldn't compete. So to start off the next match that these two played in that same way of, that same scoreline of 6-1, I think it would be disheartening. And it actually reminded me a little bit of a different match from a few years ago of Nadal against Dominic Thiem. I think it was the 2018 U.S. Open quarterfinals. And Nadal lost the first set 6-love. And sometimes I'll bring that up when talking to athletes. And it's like, okay, how do you react when you lose a set 6-love? And I think the same can be said when you lose a set 6-1. What is for most players, junior players, adult players, how often are you coming back from losing a first set like that? For most players, it's very, very infrequently. But Alcaraz, lost that set 6-1, seemed to regroup pretty well going into the second. The second set was a battle. I know Djokovic had a set point in that tiebreaker. He seemed to be maybe missing a couple of shots that he wouldn't have normally missed. And again, maybe that's the moment in a certain way that led to that. I think having Alcaraz on the other side of the net probably led to that as well in some way. But Alcaraz managed to win that second set. And then that third set had one of the longest games I've ever seen, just in terms of how many deuces there were, back and forth and back and forth. Wasn't it 27 minutes, something like that?
I think so, maybe even longer. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was remarkable. Before we move on, though, Josh, let's go back to the tiebreaker, just because
yes,
Djokovic's tiebreak record had been so amazing. And he's up 3-0. And then it was like his first unforced error in a tiebreak in a long time. And it seemed like it almost opened up like this sort of floodgate of errors. Not that really a floodgate, but he started making more and more errors after that. And that carried through into that third set. And it's just very interesting that happened. It's almost like that was the turning point in the match, because thinking about it, Djokovic is up 6-1. Now he's in a tiebreaker, and he's been dominating tiebreakers. And if he goes up 2 sets, this is a really tough hill for Alcaraz to climb back. Like, I felt like Alcaraz needs to win this tiebreaker. And going down 3-0 was obviously not optimal towards that. And then all of a sudden, Djokovic started maybe feeling it a little bit. There were a lot more errors that crept in, and then that long game and losing that game probably took a bit out of him.
Definitely. No, I think you bring up a great point that up to that point, yeah, Djokovic had won a number of tiebreakers in a row. I don't have the stat in front of me, but I know it was throughout the French Open. He had won, every tiebreaker he played in. I think it was maybe a little bit leading up to that, and also hadn't had any unforced errors, as you mentioned. So I think just really showing a really remarkable ability to not miss, to play, and it's not like he's pushing or,
right.
Just making balls in the court, obviously, for anyone who's watched him play. But he's able to just, really not get into this mode where he just doesn't miss and doesn't beat himself, and sort of forces the opponent to try to, see what they can bring out to beat him. And yeah, I think at 3-0, that really was a turning point. And maybe, 3-0 to 3-1 is not, you're still up a mini break, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be the turning point that it was, but it almost made him feel less. It almost made him feel a little bit beatable, right? When somebody has won that many tiebreakers in a row without any unforced errors, and then all of a sudden there's a crack, then it's like, okay, maybe this person is not unbeatable, right? Maybe there is a way to get through. And then, just again with players at this level, there's all it takes is one little slip up, and then that's the set. And then, once it's one set all, it was almost anybody's match. And, Alcaraz got off to a nice start in that third set, went up a break pretty quickly, and then had that, marathon game. And then sort of ran away with that third set. And I think maybe Djokovic let that happen in a certain way to maybe conserve some energy, which we, not sure we would always recommend that for people that are listening to, because, people that are listening aren't playing players of the caliber of an Alcaraz or a Djokovic. And I think, most people are playing against, if you're at 3-1, 4-1, rather than the opponent necessarily running away with it, they could crack. And then all of a sudden you're at 4-all. But I think Djokovic seem to make a calculated decision at that point to, let Alcaraz win the rest of that set and, really focus his efforts in the fourth set, which worked, and he won the fourth set. And then, Alcaraz won a pretty tight fifth, but, he did get the lead relatively early in that set as well. But yeah, I think there's definitely some takeaways. I mean, I think, and we did an episode all about Carlos Alcaraz about a little more than a year ago. I think it was after he beat
after Madrid,
Djokovic.
right? And we beat Nadal and Djokovic and then Zverev in a row.
Right. Which we hadn't seen from anybody. There's the next gen of, the likes of Zverev and Tsitsipas and Medvedev and, great players, but nobody had done that. And then we see this teenager come out and beat both of these, legends back to back, and, and follow it up with beating Zverev, who has seemed to, bring out some of his best tennis at the Masters level. And yeah, I think, so people can, refer back to that episode, and we sort of talk about his rise. But I think one of the things that I think there's a number of things we can say about him. And I think, there's been plenty of accolades about Djokovic over the years, and those are well deserved, of course. But I think with the fact that Djokovic said that Alcaraz has qualities of the big three, of all three of them, and I think people have noticed that as well. It's sort of, I think he's sort of called it Alcaraz sort of a combination of that. I think it's true. I see, Nadal's fighting spirit. I see Djokovic's fighting spirit, Djokovic's defensive abilities, Federer's ability to sort of constantly attack and constantly play offense, and and not really let up in that way, and give players the space to sort of breathe, but sort of just keep the foot on the gas, so to speak. And I think, yeah, his mentality really has shown, and you can hear the way that he talks. He does stay very humble. He doesn't talk from a point of cockiness or anything, or arrogance. And, if anybody could, it's him. But he really just seems to relish the moment. I mean, I know he talked earlier in the tournament about seeming to want to have this opportunity against Djokovic. I think he said before the match that, the final was going to be the best day of his life. Just even being out there, not even talking about winning it. But yeah, really seemed to just enjoy being out there and ready to battle. He knew that it wasn't going to be easy, and he probably could have guessed it would have taken 5 sets. And yeah, just really quite a final. I think, very memorable, and I think quite a few takeaways.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the humility piece. I think we increasingly see that as a component of being a great performer for a number of reasons. I think one, when we are more humble, we tend to be more open to learning things, and that could be learning from anybody, and also learning more from your experiences. And I think it is also, on the other side, it's a respectful way to treat your opponents. I think it also helps you compete against your opponents because it's not egocentric. It's more about just doing your best, enjoying things when you're out there. And it's not about, I have to beat you. Of course, it is one-on-one, so it can be hard to take the ego out of it. But I think the more we as players work on that humility piece, the more opportunities we have to grow and be better. And I think a little bit when you begin to talk, I know you have some really great thoughts about Chris Eubanks that you want to share. I think there's almost a realization of that with him as well. Is when we get into it, there's this idea of being more open to enjoyment and the experience and the journey, and less about an egocentric piece about beating others and certain rankings. And so the way you hear Alcaraz talk, it's indicative of how Nadal has spoken over the years. There's something in that maybe Spanish mentality where they are tremendous fighters on the court, but they're off the court, they're tremendously humble and modest, and are very respectful of who they're playing, and in a way that gives them an advantage, because they don't look at matches ever as I should win. It's more about, I go out there, I do my best, we see what happens, and I can be personally satisfied at the end if I play with a good attitude, play with great effort, leave it all out there. And so I think we are seeing that with Alcaraz, and like I said earlier, hopefully see more matches of these two, and hopefully we see more players like Alcaraz coming out with his mentality. We do have some really good young players. I think Holger Rune, who's got great game. He hasn't quite cracked the code mentally yet, but that doesn't mean he won't. Because he's still, he's the same age as Alcaraz, and it took Federer a little bit. It took even Djokovic a little bit longer, and so, tennis-wise, he's right up there with those guys, and so we'll see how some of the even newer players fit into this picture.
Definitely, no, I think there's a number of young guys that. Yeah, including Holger Rune, Yannick Sinner, I think, is definitely going to be a contender on every surface. Runa's interesting that I feel like in certain ways mentally I've been very impressed. He's won some marathon matches, some epic matches. I think he beat Alejandro Davidovich Fokina in a marathon 5-setter. I think he's won some other pretty intense 3-setters, 5-setters in his past. So he definitely seems to battle and fight. Does also seem to maybe have some controversy follow him, or maybe get in some fights with opponents, umpires, that sort of thing that maybe can derail players at times as well. But yeah, no, I think I think there's a number of players that will contend with an Alcaraz and a Djokovic and Medvedev in years to come. But for whatever reason, Alcaraz has seemed to get there a little bit faster. And the fact that he's number one and 2 Grand Slam titles at 20 is remarkable. And I'm definitely excited to see what he can continue to produce in upcoming years. I think especially if he can stay healthy. There's not too much that can necessarily get in his way, but I think there are a number of players that can contend potentially. So definitely wanted to talk a little bit about Chris Eubanks, and I think his rise has definitely been remarkable. But I don't think I'm the first person to say that. I think a lot of people have been talking about that recently, but I think he's a guy that was for the last, I think, few years, maybe like up to 5 years, has sort of been and I think this is actually from a quote that I can share, been between the 150 220 range. So playing mostly challenger events, playing some 250s, but playing some ATP events, whether it's wild cards, whether it's qualifying, other opportunities, but playing a lot at that challenger level, playing a lot, being in a lot of qualifying for Grand Slam tournaments. But recently has really made his breakthrough. And I think it was Miami. He made it to the quarterfinals, broke into the top 100, and then continued playing well, won Mallorca on grass. And I think he made a comment that leading up to that, despite his game being, a big serving, aggressive game, very aggressive game, hadn't necessarily always felt so comfortable on grass. And I think a lot of players don't necessarily practice as much on grass, if ever, or have the experience playing on it. So I think for a lot of people, there's definitely a learning curve there. But seemed to feel comfortable, won Mallorca, and then made it all the way to the quarterfinals, beating players including Cam Norrie and Stefanos Tsitsipas, and took Daniil Medvedev to 5 sets in the quarterfinals. And I think there's a lot to say about him. I mean, I think number one, just when you hear him talk, just very eloquent, very seems like the world's nicest guy. Constantly has a smile on his face, both during interviews and during matches. You see it a lot. And I think just his attitude about sort of trusting his process and really prioritizing that. And I can read a quote that he shared after his quarterfinal defeat against Daniil Medvedev really shows this. And I think one other thing that's interesting, and I know other people have mentioned this, but he actually did some commentary. I think it was last year for Tennis Channel, which is interesting. I think there were certain periods of time in the calendar where he wasn't playing. I think maybe certain weeks in the calendar where he didn't play, and did some commentary for Tennis Channel, and actually talked about how that helped his game. Actually talked about how that, being able to analyze an opponent was helpful, and even talked about how during matches he would think at times about, okay, if I wasn't in this, if I was commentating this match, if I was watching this match from an outsider's point of view, what would I say? What advice, would I give myself? And I think that relates to a lot of the things that we've talked about in terms of trying to take more of an outsider's point of view, trying to be more non-judgmental or objective in our thinking about our own game. And yeah, I think there's definitely a lot to be said there. But let me read this quote from his after his quarterfinal match. It is a little bit on the longer side, so you can bear with me. But I think it is really important, and I think there's a lot to talk about here. So the quote was, "Now that you've made the quarterfinals, what do you want next? What is your next goal?" And he says, "It's a bit tough right now after the match to jump right into setting new, especially lofty goals at this point. I think my goals are a little bit different. I think that if I can continue to have the joy I've had on court for these past 3 weeks, continue to work as hard as I've been doing over the past year, 12 months, I think good things are going to happen, and it's kind of going to take care of itself. It would be very easy for me to say, I think after this, I'm not 100% sure, but I should be around 30-something live in the live rankings. It would be very easy to say, okay, I want to be top 20 now. I've set goals based on a ranking before. It didn't go well. I've kind of thrown that out the window. I'm just kind of enjoying the journey at this point. Wherever my career takes me, and I can continue to have the fun that I've been having, I can continue to work as hard as I've been working. Where I end up, I end up. I think at this point, especially considering the fact I've spent 5 years hovering in that 220 to 150 range, playing so many challengers, at this point, it's just the cherry on top. I'm just enjoying myself. I'm having a great time. I'm probably having the most fun I've ever had in playing tennis. I'm going to continue to try to ride this momentum out. We're going to see where it takes me. I'm not trying to avoid your question or dance around it. It's just genuinely my perspective. 2 years ago, I tried to set the goal for here, where I wanted to be ranked, what I wanted to do. Didn't really work out that well for me. I'm trying to take a little bit of a different approach." So definitely a lot there. Brian, I wanted to see some of your thoughts about Chris Eubanks, about his run, and about that quote as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the nice thing about Chris Eubanks is you and I, we attended the Newport tournament together last year, and we got to see him. And I had actually seen him maybe the month before when I was in Orlando. He was playing a challenger event there. And he's a lot of fun to watch. He's very smooth, as you said. He's very aggressive, great kick serve. And yeah, just he looked like a guy who you wondered why he was at that level. He looked like he had tools where he could do more, and now we see that he's progressing. I love the quote because it reminds me of Eric Buderac's approach in his TED Talk about simply trying to enjoy that journey and really with the mission of just becoming the best player you can become. And I think it's a great overarching mission or vision to why one plays tennis. The goal piece is more, I think, or the ranking piece, if you choose to use that, is more of a milestone look at things. But the overall vision and mission should really be about just becoming the best player you can become. And the nice thing that we're hearing with Chris is he's developing the wisdom and perspective, and he's really putting together the different pieces that work for him. The enjoyment of it. The enjoyment of the training, the enjoyment of playing and competing. We've talked about definitions of what it means to be competitive, and the top priority of that is to enjoy what you're doing. And so that's something I would hope that people can latch onto from that quote. It is really important to enjoy this process, and it's not always easy. But if you can, in a way, commit to enjoying, as Eric Buderac put it, the daily struggle to get better. Can you enjoy the challenge of the fight of a match and then still be respectful after? Can you just see where the journey is going to take you as you put in your daily work? Not only Eric Buderac, but even John Wooden, the famous college basketball coach, talked about creating what he called masterpiece days. Can you just have a great day today and then do it again tomorrow? Don't worry so much about timelines and whatever. Can you just get the most out of today that you can? And then repeat all those processes again tomorrow. So you create a string of masterpiece days. And I think what we're hearing Chris say is that he's figured out at this point how to create those masterpiece days and how to string them together. And now it's sort of like the fruit of that work has come out. And it's so cool to see that. So cool to see someone, I guess I use this with Holger Rune, to see someone actually crack the code and now is progressing. And I think that's a big part of all of our journeys is, can we figure out how we put these pieces together that make our puzzle more and more complete, and we get better and better at what we do, whether that's tennis, whether it's some other, pursuit you have, or a professional career. Can you constantly be looking to put this so that it begins to click more and more? And it's great to hear about Chris Eubanks figuring this out.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it often is, step by step. And maybe that step-by-step approach shows up in the rankings or shows up in some other quantifiable way when outsiders look at someone's results. I think of junior players, for instance, or adult players, and, thinking about things like UTR or NTRP, level, or world tennis number, or however we want to measure, USTA rankings, however we want to measure success in that way. But I think there's, we can also measure it, and maybe it's better to do so based on that process, based on how hard we're working, based on the enjoyment that we're finding, based on us seeing the progress on a day-to-day basis. And maybe that shows up in our matches. Sometimes I think our ranking or our results are sort of a lagging indicator behind where our game actually is. And what I mean by, and I know we've sort of talked about this in the past with, habits and, goals and things like that. But sometimes we get to a certain level, but the ranking hasn't quite caught up to where we're at. And so it can sort of be more of a lagging indicator, something like, our fitness results, or maybe a lagging indicator of our lifestyle, right? Our diet and nutrition and things like that. I think sometimes things like results and rankings can also be a lagging indicator in a certain way, and we can see ourselves putting in the work and see ourselves making progress. And sometimes it feels like, we're not seeing the rankings that we want to. And I think, I think there's different comparisons we can make here. I think Chris Eubanks is a great person that people can think of if they're seeing this in their own game and they're like, why am I not achieving these results? I see how well I've been playing. I see the progress I've been making. There's also the old bamboo story of, that, the bamboo is underground, and I think it's about 5 years. It's, it's watered, and it's, it's building this really strong foundation. But it hasn't, left the ground. And then all of a sudden, in a matter of, a couple of weeks, it just takes off and grows, tons and tons and tons of feet in a very short amount of time after, 5 years of nothing that others can see. So I think there's that as a comparison. There's a number of different comparisons, but I think it's really cool to see a player at this level who can really embody that sort of a philosophy, that sort of a mindset of prioritizing some of these important things, prioritizing that I'm going to keep working hard. I'm really enjoying the sport. And it doesn't seem like he's just enjoying it because of the results he's had.
Correct.
It seems like he's enjoying that journey a lot more, where, maybe for a while, being in that 150 to 220 range, as he talked about, maybe it sounds like it was a lot more about rankings. Okay, I'm 175 right now. Okay, I want to break into the top 150 by this date. Okay, then I want to get to the top 100 by this date. Then I want to get, top 75. And in reality, progress doesn't happen in a straight line. It's not like, okay, I'm here today, and then a month from now I want to be here, and then 2 months, and then 3 months. And I think we can think of it that way, but I don't think that's realistic. I think in general, there's always a lot of ups and downs for any player in any sort of pursuit. I almost think of it, and maybe I've made this comparison, or we've talked about this in the past. I almost think of it like the stock market in a certain way, where on a day-to-day basis there's ups and downs, and there's a lot of emotions around those ups and downs. Maybe the market's up 1%, or it's down 1.5% or 0.5% or whatever it is, and on that day there's a lot of emotion one way or the other. But can we have the ability to zoom out a little bit, to take a step back, to see, okay, where are things going this quarter, over the past 3 months, or where are things going over the last year, over the last 5 to 10 years? Then we can start to really see the direction that things are going in, whether that's the market, whether that's one particular company. And I think that that's the same thing when we think about progress. We have to understand that there is always going to be those ups and downs. There's always going to be, some of those challenges along the way. But if we can keep the right process, if we can keep doing things right, if we can, also understand that, by having that process, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to win right now. That doesn't necessarily mean that our results are always going to be there, or we're always going to win matches that we feel like we should. But over time, that's the sort of that's what we need to really make the sort of progress in the rankings, and make sort of that more objective process, make that objective improvement that outsiders can see. But it takes time, and sometimes it's faster. With a guy like Alcaraz, and who's just burst onto the scene and went from, I think, a ranking of 32 to 1 in less than a year. And sometimes it takes a lot longer, and somebody like a Chris Eubanks stays in that 150 to 220 range for a number of years, and then all of a sudden, like bamboo, just takes off and has this huge breakthrough. So I think I think we see it both ways, but I think with both of them, they really do seem to prioritize that process over everything. And whether sooner in the case of Alcaraz, or longer in the case of Eubanks, have both really broken through, and also have seemed to maintain their strong foundation. Maybe I'm going a little too far with this comparison here, but I think there's a lot there.
I think there's a lot there, and I think it's a good point to bring up, and then let's see how he does the rest of the summer, and the rest of the year, obviously. So, how about we move to the women's final? I think that that was a very interesting match, and as you noted, Josh, that Marketa Vondrousova won 4-4. And what were your thoughts on this match? Jabeur coming in, another Grand Slam final for her, and seemingly the favorite, but didn't work out for her.
Yeah, very impressive result from Vondrousova. The fact that she had been, I think it was just last year, had actually been at Wimbledon as a spectator, because of a serious injury that she had, and to get all the way to as an unseeded player, actually winning the tournament and beating a lot of top players along the way, such as Pegula and Svitolina, and then ultimately Ons Jabeur in the final. And has a very interesting game where she doesn't necessarily blow people off the court. She's aggressive, but she's not hitting as many winners as some of these other players necessarily, but she's very, very solid. And I think Ons Jabeur was definitely the favorite going in, and for good reason. This was her third major final, has been a top 10 player for a while now, but Ons didn't seem to play up to her capability that day. And, I think we can all speculate as to why. Maybe it's the moment, I think there's some pressure there, in terms of, I think Ons has really been a trailblazer in a lot of ways, in terms of, being the first Arab woman to get to this level, being the first, African woman to get to this sort of level in terms of playing in, Grand Slam final, major finals. but has had a tough time when she's been at that in that moment in the finals of some of these Grand Slams, just getting over that last hurdle. And no, I think it shows that the pressure can impact everybody, including the best players in the world, which I think is a point that that we've talked about a lot on this show, that I try to make to athletes that I work with, where it's like, hey, we don't judge yourself if you feel nervous, if you feel pressure when you're playing, because the same thing happens to the best in the world, and they're dedicating their lives and careers to this. They're spending a lot of time working on it. So I think, yeah, Ons did definitely seem to feel the moment. Definitely, I think her consistency wasn't there in the way that it had been in previous matches. Also didn't seem to, I think what makes Ons so great is her ability to really mix things up. Use the drop shot, use the slice, come into net. Also she's not an overpowering player either, but she has maybe more tools than anybody at her disposal. But it almost felt like maybe she was out of rhythm or out of sync a little bit. And then because of that, something like the drop shot becomes less of a surprise tactic and it becomes more expected. And then when it's used, it's a lot less effective. So I think she, had a tough time maybe bringing out her standard or her level that we've, grown accustomed to seeing. And Vondrousova really rose to the occasion. And it almost reminded me of a couple of years ago when we saw Emma Raducanu and Leila Fernandez, who both of them were in a major final for the first time, and sort of riding this wave of emotions, wave of momentum, and sort of just I think for Emma that sort of carried her through that final. And I think with Vondrousova, it's sort of a similar scenario where she, not that she was as young or anything as Emma Raducanu, but had quite a bit of momentum going into it and just sort of seemed to manage to keep that rolling, keep her game up. Maybe didn't seem to, focus as much on the moment itself of, winning a Wimbledon final, but just seemed to focus more on her game and managed to bring out that solid tennis that has gotten her to this point, and and helped her be successful and win that match.
I think the solid tennis, Josh, is the point I wanted to emphasize with Vondrousova. That not that she's like Djokovic. I'm not saying she's going to become like a Djokovic, but she, in a way, made herself hard to beat like a Djokovic. She covers the court very well. She's able to, use almost a similar shot to like Federer with this sort of squash forehand type of retrieval shot. And she makes players, beat her. And that's a really effective way to put pressure on opponents, especially ones that are nervous, is by making them beat you. And Jabeur admitted that, she felt pressure coming into this match. She didn't think she played great. She didn't serve well. And I think you could even see it, watching it in the U.S. on ESPN. Chris Evert made the comment that Jabeur was making far more errors in this match than she had made in previous ones. And I think Jabeur went almost kind of on a roller coaster of play. So she had some very poor games, then she had some great games. And then some of the poor games would come out more at the end of the set. And that was really the difference. But where Vondrousova tended to be a little bit more solid, as you said, throughout. And there's a good lesson there, Josh, I think, for players in trying and understanding that making good decisions. So our episode on 7-shot tennis, our episode on playing by the rules, are ways of you not beating yourself. And that's a great base to start with. And Vondrousova really executed that well the entire tournament. No one could beat her in this tournament. We'll see how that goes for, again, the rest of the year. Sometimes people can get really hot for a week or two. We've seen that in the past, especially on the women's side. and then it's difficult to maintain that. I mean, you brought up Emma Raducanu and Leylah Fernandez. They really haven't ascended to the success that U.S. Open final might have indicated for them, right? So it's a tough sport. It's tough to maintain this level and this level of results. For Jabeur, let's hope she learns from it. I think that's going to be her goal, is to learn from it. This is a third time. She's in good company in terms of players who've lost, their first few Grand Slam finals and have gone on to win many others. So she's putting herself in good positions, and maybe she's at that bamboo moment, Josh, right? Maybe there's something ready to spring into success here. So that's the good news for her. She keeps getting herself into these good positions, and I'm sure she'll figure it out. And so that's I'm optimistic for her. She's a great player. She obviously enjoys what she does. With each of these experiences, I'm sure she tweaks something here and there to help make it better for the next time. And so will be very interesting to see how she performs in New York.
Absolutely, and you mentioned that a lot of that there are a lot of top players who have had similar experiences where they have gotten to multiple finals and maybe didn't bring out their best tennis and didn't end up winning them, but ended up being successful a little bit later. And I think another player we can compare her to, or that we'll see if her career goes a similar trajectory. But I think even somebody like a Novak Djokovic, and I think, people often remember his more, his last 12 or so years, I think since 2011, when he really, had this incredible 2011 for those that remember. And I think since then has been, a pretty dominant force in the sport. But before that, since he burst onto the scene, I think right around 2005, getting to the top of the game. Between then and 2010, I know he won one major. I think it was the Australian Open in 2009, 2008. But other than that, he was solidly number three. He was solidly number three in the rankings behind Nadal and Federer. Those two were the dominant forces. Djokovic, was certainly winning a lot of matches, but hadn't necessarily broken through and beaten those top two guys and taken their spot. And then all of a sudden, some things changed. He made some changes with his diet, seemed to focus more on the mental side of the game. Focused on some other things physically, yoga, different things. He has a book called Serve to Win that people can learn more about some of these changes that he's made. Really, I think he's a person that athletes can look up to also in terms of this same sort of idea, the same sort of bamboo comparison, where it's like, sometimes it takes longer. Sometimes someone bursts onto the scene at 18 or 19 and gets to the top of the game, like an Alcaraz. And sometimes they get close, and maybe that close is being number three, or maybe that being close is having the game and maybe the results aren't showing in that same way, like a Chris Eubanks. But over time, they keep working at it. They keep improving. And we see with Djokovic what happened with his career, the way that his career really took off. So I think he's a great person to maybe compare to, or maybe to aspire to in terms of that as well.
And Andy Murray, I think, was a similar one, because he would be probably solidly number 4 in that time frame, and he lost, I think, his first 3. Ivan Lendl, who helped Andy kind of break that streak, also lost his first few Grand Slam finals before breaking through in 1984 at the French Open. And so, yeah, the more you put yourself in these positions, the more you learn about it, and the more likely it becomes that you'll win one. So I would expect that Ons will continue to work on it, and we'll see her in more finals. And so I think there are a lot of people that she can take inspiration from on this and maybe even get advice from about how to approach these upcoming opportunities. So, so a very interesting set of themes here from Wimbledon 2023. Any sort of last thoughts, Josh, on the championships this year?
No, I mean, I just, I know also on the women's side, players like Chris Evert and Simona Halep also, I think, lost their first three major finals. So a couple of good comparisons there. If I recall, Andre Agassi had lost, I think, his first few as well. So yeah, plenty of players to maybe compare herself to, or plenty of other champions who have had similar sorts of maybe challenges along the way. But yeah, I think it's been a great conversation. Maybe in terms of last thoughts, I don't know. I think we've mainly covered it. I think it'll be a really interesting summer in terms of the U.S. hardcourt swing. With all of this obviously leading up to the U.S. Open. And I think we will all be interested in seeing what happens there. I mean, both on the men's side, both on the women's side, I think could definitely see another Alcaraz Djokovic final. I think we didn't really talk about Iga Swiatek here, but she has been, the number one player with, Kasatkina and Svitolina. Kasatkina and Sabalenka not too far behind, with having a lot of success and winning a major title as well. So it was too bad about Kasatkina in this tournament. And it'll be, I think, a lot of contenders on the men's and women's side going into the U.S. Open, and very excited to see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. So as always, Josh, great conversation. So thanks for that, and thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, you can check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for the two of us, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. If you have the opportunity, also please rate and review the podcast so others can find it. Additionally, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube, so you can be notified of new episodes. And you can also check us out on Instagram. If you would like to support the podcast, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership, where you can learn about the benefits of being part of the Tennis IQ podcast community. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.